Hey, y'all. I want to talk about the imagination and how it kind of fills our lives and rules us. Celebrated the 4th of July in the United States. Great big deal in the United States. We, have fireworks and shoot things off and make a bunch of noise. But it reminds me one time I was in Germany and I wished all the Germans happy 4th of July. And they all kind of looked at me and went, thank you. Because it didn't mean anything to them. Kind of interesting how, you can have this very fervent, intense, emotional feeling for something, and somebody from another culture doesn't mean a darn thing. A lot of us have very intense religious beliefs that they must be followed. They must be followed this protocol, and yet to somebody else, it's like, oh, that's kind of odd. No disrespect to Muslims, but they have the Hajj. Millions of people go on the Hajj. They come up there and they walk around in this big circle in this square with this obelisk that's very important, and they throw stones at it and get rid of their sins. And it's a very important thing. They will actually, some of them will actually kill people if you mock it. To me, as an American, it looks like a bunch of people just walking around a big rock throwing stones at it. To them, 4th of July looks like probably a bunch of drunk Americans firing fireworks off and yelling about freedom we may or may not have. But I've really kind of noticed, there's even a word made up for it in almost every religion and every language. The imagination. And I find that it's not just, well, you may notice it's like you can go into it and it's like it's almost more real. It's almost more real than what's out here. You can get into movies and act like they're realer. Now we sit here and say that we know it's not real. It's just the imagination, but people have long, ongoing arguments about it. Like when Game of Thrones was on, there was a point where Jon Snow, the character, was killed. And big, long arguments about was Jon Snow alive or dead, as if it was real. And yet people would sit there and say, well, we know it's not real. We're just going to sit here and spend hours arguing with each other about whether it's real or not. Jon Snow is neither alive nor dead. Jon Snow didn't exist. A lot of my religious beliefs, a lot of everybody's religious beliefs, we just have decided that's the truth. And anybody who's not of that faith, well, there's something wrong with them. I say that I'm worshiping God, but it seems to me it's like my imagination is worshiping itself. I sit here and hold it like it's the truth. But to quote that nefarious, wise philosopher from the New Testament, Pontius Pilate, truth. What is truth? Truth is what you command it to be and decide it is. And yet when we're talking about God, we're talking about something that's beyond us. And I've kind of reached the conclusion that, this imagination may be the very thing that keeps me from seeing what is true. Even though I act like it's the truth, I act like it's God. Almost every religious text they talk about this being of light that deceives us, that we think it is God-like, and we bind to it very intensely, but it's hiding it. People will get emotionally attached to their political leaders. Even though most of the time you've never met them. Because it's in my imagination, I've decided I've got this series of beliefs, and that person is the one who represents my beliefs. It's not even about them. Actually, it's not even about me. It's just this set of beliefs. Now, what's weirder is, the thoughts can change and roll around. And, I'm sure if you've listened to your thoughts for a long time, they just kind of meander around and change. They go all over the place. And yet, they run with or without you. If you try and stop them, they just keep right on running. But I've also noticed as this big flood of opinions and thoughts goes on, and all this changes goes on, there's always this attention that's always been here that isn't moved around by all of that. And I think that's actually who I am. And the imagination is just kind of this covering. It's like a protective bubble that is completely grabbed onto our attention. It protects us so well that we forget who we are. And we forget that, apparently we're all come from God. Now, a lot of religious texts, it's like, well, my God's the one, the defender of me, and they're behind me, and so I'm going to go over and chop you up in defense of whatever. But a lot of times that's just imaginary. Like Russia's having this war in Ukraine. What is Russia but an imagination? It's basically Russians assign their own personal feelings and impressions and thoughts, and they call that Russia, even though it's all these various individual ideas. And some Russians think Vladimir Putin is the defender of Russia, and others thinks he's leading Russia into the dirt. In the United States, Trump is either the living saint that God sent to save the United States, or he's this fascist dictator, adulterating liar that people are being fooled by. But neither of it's true. It's this imagination that works on all of us. It seems to be the one that's the problem. It's the one that's causing us to go to war and fight over things. Borders between countries only exist in the imagination. The idea that, you get honored by your country because you slaughtered a bunch of people on the other side's army to defend someone's imagination of what their country is. The United States is just made up. If you go to the border of Canada, there might be a fence there, but that's a fence we put there to represent our imagination. There is no border. Borders do have a good thing because with them we all kind of agree that's Canada, this is the United States. For, thousands of years without borders, we just kind of raid each other and take each other's stuff and rape and pillage and murder and kind of do that over our agreed upon borders. Okay, that's your stuff, this is our stuff, until we don't agree with it. Like Vladimir Putin and the leaders of Russia have decided those borders they agreed to in 1991 aren't right, so we're going to adjust them. And 500,000 dead and wounded Russians later, and who knows how many Ukrainians, they're still fighting over it. Little 3-day war that's now, 2.5 years long, slaughtering each other over something that actually isn't real. It's all just imagination. Very strange. It's like we worship our imagination as if it's a god, and yet it's the very thing that gets in the way and keeps us from meeting the real thing, I think. Anyway, that's what I had to say today. Thank you very much.